first of all, the book starts, the VIG starts, that is the prologue. And, what I want to say from the get-go is the book is not about 9/11. It's not heavy, not heavy 9/11 stuff. But, I had originally written the book. It started with, I guess, what is chapter 1. But I thought about, as in the reading said, the enormity of the event and how that event, that particular day, just, literally and figuratively just put a cloud over everything, over the whole industry, New York, Wall Street, and it just set the tone for everything else that happened since. And not only that, it makes you put in perspective the things that happened before then. That's the enormity of that event. So I felt that it would be disingenuous to write a story about that era and not mention it and not write about it. So that is sort of a synopsis of my experience of that day. And also one of the reasons I decided how I convinced myself to add it in, because, you never want to, try to market something like that or something, use it to your own benefit. But I did, it's mentioned in the book but not in the reading, is I always note to acknowledge when I was there and running away down the street, someone in uniform, whether it was a cop or a fireman or a transit worker or someone in uniform ran past me and ran into the World Trade Center collapsing as I ran away the other way. So I always make sure to note that, because that is just it's a pretty remarkable thing that I saw. Yes.
It's not something that you're ever going to forget.
No, it really isn't. But it is true that it's this metaphor of in that prologue, Frank is running away, and throughout the story, he's running from someone, mostly running from himself, and it sort of marks the end of this sort of Wild West era that was happening down there at the time.
John, we're going to be talking about that and a lot more in depth about the VIG. Before we do, tell us about your background.
Well, I am. Now I'm a private equity advisor and working in New York and Manhattan. But as I was writing this in my head, I worked on the floor of the American Stock Exchange for about 18 years. I started out as what was called a data clerk. Back in the real old days, they would, when there was a trade or a transaction, someone would mark it down on a card, and they would hand the card into the back of the trading post, and some below minimum wage kid, who was me, would take that card and put it in a machine, and that's where it would be reflected and shown up on the screens above. The old-fashioned ticker tape. That's literally what was happening. And I loved the place. I loved the atmosphere. I loved the vibe of everything that was happening. So one day, after the close, I walked around the trading floor and shook hands with anyone who I thought looked like a boss, and introduced myself and said I want to work. So I started as a clerk for a specialist. It's called a specialist clerk, where we put the trades down in the book and keep the transactions. And I worked my way up to be a specialist. And by the time I left the floor, I was the managing partner of a risk arbitrage firm, where when it comes in the story, in the VIG, where I'm standing in the spiders, in the SPY, or the spiders they call it, trading pit, with a headset on, going to a clerk, and the clerk is going to Chicago to a clerk in the futures pit, and so I did all of it. I really did.
So you're writing about something that you know a lot about.
Oh yeah. I often say that I'm writing about things that, most books that people will read, financial thrillers, or first of all, either they're about the doings in the boardroom or in the executive suites or the corner offices. The Vig is more the the alleys, in Brannigan's, the bar behind the exchange, and it's about the the envelopes that are passed under the table and that type of thing. But most writers who write these types of stories, they interview people who were involved in some sort of financial event. I was the one standing in the trading crowd. I remember this is going way back during long-term capital when that whole market crash thing happened. I was standing in the SPY trading pit, and the Goldman Sachs broker walked in there, and I forget the number, but he had like $10 million to sell, which was, was like a $200 million transaction. And we found out later, Goldman Sachs was hedging against this hedge fund collapse. So, it was literally in the middle of a lot of these things, usually on the tail end of it, but, so I pretty intimately understand the workings of Wall Street and what goes on. So it is sort of go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I was just going to say, let's get into the characters a little bit, and then we're going to get into what was the scam. But let's talk about the characters. The three primary characters in your book: Frank McGinley, Brogan, and Carla. Yeah. Now let's start with Frank.
I call them the big three. These are the three big characters, and in a lot of ways, they're not. They're similar in some ways. They're very, very. What is the word? They have a narrow focus as far as what they think is right and wrong and how to go about it. But all of them actually are fairly damaged. Frank is the person who uncovers the scam, and he's sort of fallen on hard times because of his own weaknesses. But Frank, I like to describe him as he's a good person, but it doesn't come to him easily. In other words, he has to work on being a good guy. He is a good guy, but his natural inclination is he's a bit of a wise guy. He sometimes he takes a step backwards. He tends to take one or maybe 1.5 steps forward, but he does take a step backwards from time to time. Carla, on the other hand, is like the assassin, the female assassin in the story, and she is just plain, flat-out evil. I mean, she just is. She's, savagery is a word that someone used to describe her. But I really do believe that she wants to be a good person. She knows that she's damaged. It's like, she knows that what she's doing is wrong, but she can't fit into normal society. It's just, and in the Vig, she has this constant struggle with that, although she always defaults to the evil side. Brogan is I guess sort of he's the older guy who he's a former federal agent. Well, actually, he is a federal agent. He ends up getting fired during the course of this book. But I pictured him as like someone maybe that worked in the Reagan White House. There were always these guys in gray suits and gray hair and red ties, and like Edwin Meese and Donald Regan, like sort of anonymous sort of people from the past, but that they were like pushing all the buttons all over the world, and people would die in Panama, gold would go up, who knows? That's just the kind of guys they were. But that's what Brogan was. But see, now Brogan's, his flaw, I guess, is, but he recognizes it. He sees that his way of doing things are coming to an end. And he's this former great influential man, and the world has passed him by, and I look, and I love this metaphor. I describe him as Willie Mays batting .211 for the 73 Mets. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as a young man that was a Met fan, I remember watching and thinking, oh, my God, that's Willie Mays, and look at this poor guy. He can't even get around second base, So that's Brogan. So it makes for an interesting mix and a lot of cross currents.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a second reading that we'd like to do. Before we do that, we'll take a short commercial break. We'll be right back with the second dramatic reading.
Learning and good nutrition does not end when school lets out. The USDA's Summer Food Service Program helps provide nutritious meals to children in low-income areas so they're better fueled with healthy food to learn and grow. To learn more about sponsoring a feeding site in your community, go to www.summerfood.usda.gov.
Data was never put into the system. The options were so lousy, the trades so infrequent, there simply wasn't much need. He would go through the printout manually, like in the old days, positioned at the far end of the trading post. This was reserved for the washed-up trader, off in the corner where he couldn't do much damage. Frank was aware of his status. Everyone was. If he didn't turn things around soon, he would be gone, washed up and thrown away at 38. There was no way he was going to let that happen. He got to work, thumbing through the stack of paper to get to his options. As he flipped over the first section of the stack, it fell over and unwound to the floor like a paper slinky. He tried to get the thing back together, but even more of the stack unraveled. He looked like he was trying to fold a map in the wind, cursing and folding, cursing and folding. Finally, he got it together, ripped his options off the stack, and threw the rest in the trash. By chance, on the top of the pile was Dino Corp, one of his real beauties. Dino was a few months removed from its dead cat bounce. The body was starting to rot. The stock hadn't traded in over a month, a $3 stock on its way to delisting. The Frank McGinley of equity options. Frank hadn't looked at Dino in months. No need to. Nothing to check. Right away he saw a problem. The last time he had checked, his P&L was up $5,800, at least. Now the total was less than $3,000. He knew he hadn't made any trades, and the stock itself had been unchanged for weeks. Most days it didn't even open for trading. How could he lose $3,000 in this thing? It didn't add up. Frank had found his task for the day. He handed his clerk a $5 to go for coffee and separated Dino from the rest of his paperwork. He started going over every line, one by one. He didn't use a calculator or his computer, just his brain. He always had a way with numbers. He wasn't Rain Man or anything, but he just had a knack. From his first days as a clerk, Frank was able to calculate complicated updates and P&Ls in his head. Once, he updated his positions in his head within 10 points after trading through half a buy and sell pad. Different strike prices, different deltas, and various price changes in a frantic trading crowd. Yet he always knew what his numbers were. It was something he could always do. Before his clerk was back with the coffee, Frank saw the problem. His P&L was off by $4.86 yesterday. He went over it again. SEC fees, clearing costs, and soon he accounted for it all. Still, it was off. Frank assumed it was like this every day, and that would account for part of the $3,000 in the last couple of months. Frank was excited. This